Good afternoon. Welcome to the Midday Mull for Monday, the 27th of June. Midday, we're in the midst of load shedding, so the church is in darkness. Fortunately, I have a standard light which I can use. And anyway, it's about the word, not about the vision. So that can still go. I can still speak. You can still hear. That's what matters. But a slightly darkened church does have a certain appeal to it as well. Now, with Robert Murray McShane's reading scheme, today we read Matthew chapter 7, the end of the Sermon on the Mount. And as I read through it, every single paragraph could be spoken about. There's such richness in the Sermon on the Mount. There's so many challenges that we hear and so many encouragements that we have that is well worth reading again and again. So go and read Matthew chapters 5, 6, and 7. You'll benefit from it. But today I thought just picking almost at random the first couple of verses, which also highlights the complexity of Scripture very often, because it begins, "Do not judge, or you will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you." So Jesus is quite clear, do not judge. And it speaks to a challenge that we face as Christians. How often don't people avoid Christians because we are judgmental, because we look down our noses at other people, because we look at somebody that's drinking or smoking or whatever and say, "Oh, that's so evil." If they're outside of the church, they have a completely different standard to what we do. And being judgmental doesn't draw them to Christ. When you look at the people that were drawn to Jesus, it was the prostitutes and the tax collectors and the sinners that flocked to him. It wasn't the good people. It was the scribes and Pharisees that Jesus avoided, that Jesus challenged, and that the sinners avoided. And too often as Christians, we're aligned with the Pharisees, and we need to be far more welcoming and open and generous and non-judgmental as we welcome people and draw them to Jesus. But having said that, at the same time, we need to recognize that when Jesus says this, he's not saying don't evaluate people, don't measure people, because in other places we're called to do that. He also warns us that false prophets will come like wolves in sheep's clothing. So you have to evaluate a person and say, is this person that is speaking, is this a wolf or is this a sheep? Do they just look like a sheep or are they actually a sheep? Likewise, later on, Paul gives certain criteria that you need to use when appointing elders in the church. Now, if we're not to judge anybody blanketly, how can you do that? How can you evaluate whether this person that's coming for leadership actually measures up to the standards Paul sets? So when Jesus says to us, do not judge, this isn't a blanket, do not judge anybody ever, just accept everybody the way they are. Instead, I think it's a challenge not to be judgmental. And when we do have to judge people, to make sure that the criteria we use are right. Because Jesus also says, for the measure we use against them will be used against us. And so if we judge people, we've got to measure them against God's standards, not our opinions. So be challenged to be unjudgmental, but at the same time to be discerning and to always be welcoming of people to the church and to Jesus. Be blessed.